All right. Can you guys hear me? Can you all see me? Awesome. Yes, I'm excited to be here. Yeah. So Mark had asked me beginning of the year to do one of the Bible studies here in January, and I agreed. There's something that had kind of been on my heart for a while. So when he asked me, I was kind of like, I really was excited to do this because I felt like this is something that we've kind of been touching base on here at Who, and it's something that's been in my heart and I've experienced in my life, and I just wanted to talk through it with you guys and look at some scriptures and have some conversation about it. Specifically, the topic that I want to talk about is relationships inside conflict and disagreement. I really feel like this is something that maybe has been lost or has been forgotten how to do successfully for a while now, or at least it's been portrayed that way. In the culture that we're in right now, it's kind of, if you don't believe what I believe, if you don't agree with what I stand for, I can't have a relationship with you, I can't spend time with you. We need to find our little bubbles or our little echo chambers of people that agree with us, people that think the way that we think, that believe what we believe, and that's where we're going to live, and that's where we're going to operate. And I just think that's not the model that Jesus gave us. I'm going to talk about one specific area where I feel like he really modeled that for us and break that down. And just, even specifically inside of a church, how do we operate and work in relationship even when we have differences in our apologetics and what we believe. But we all believe that Jesus is our Savior. We all believe that that's where we're headed and that's what we need to be focused on. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is specifically, so like one example that Paul gives us of conflict and conflict in relationship that didn't break the relationship is whenever he confronted Peter about his sliding back into Jewish principles. So I want to read that real quick because it's a really cool interaction that Peter and Paul have. It's in Galatians 2:11 through 14. It says, when Peter visited Antioch, he caused the believers to stumble over his behavior. So I, and this is obviously Paul talking, confronted him to his face. He enjoyed eating with the Gentile believers who didn't keep the Jewish customs up until the time Jacob's Jewish friends arrived from Jerusalem. When he saw them, he withdrew from his Gentile friends, fearing how it would look to them if he ate with Gentile believers. And so because of Peter's hypocrisy, many other Jewish believers followed suit, refusing to eat with Gentile believers. Even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocritical behavior. So when I realized they were acting inconsistently with the revelation of the gospel, I confronted Peter in front of everyone. You were born a Jew, but you've chosen to disregard Jewish regulations and live like a Gentile. Why then do you force Gentiles to conform to these same rules? So in that situation, Paul, he recognized something that Peter was doing. He wasn't afraid of the conflict and calling out his brother, saying, "Hey, like, what's going on here? Why are you doing this?" But it didn't break the relationship. It's not like Peter and Paul didn't interact with each other, didn't help to bring people to Christ, didn't do evangelism together. It was just a really cool situation where Paul, in my opinion, showed how you can have conversation, have conflict, but still have relationship. So that was one that really impacted me. The one that I really want to focus on, though, tonight is Jesus and his interaction with the Samaritan woman. So I did I knew that there was like a conflict between Jews and Samaritans. I didn't really understand the whole concept behind it, so I did a little bit of research, and it's actually pretty fascinating to see where it came from, where it was born out of, and how it kind of snowballed into something really divisive, and what Jesus did with the Samaritan woman was way more of a big deal than I think I even realized. So the Samaritans and the Jew situation kind of developed out of whenever the two kingdoms split in the Old Testament. You had the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And what ended up happening was the northern kingdom didn't really have anywhere to worship because the southern kingdom had Jerusalem and had all that type of thing, so they had to create their own places of worship. And in doing that, it actually created a really big conflict between the northern and the southern kingdoms. The southern kingdom assumed that the northern kingdoms were worshiping idols, Even though they both say they're sons of Abraham, even though they both followed the first 5 books of the Old Testament, they believed in the coming of the Messiah, all that stuff, but because they worshiped somewhere separately, the southern kingdom, who wrote most of the Bible, portrayed them as a pretty perverse group of people who strayed away from God. And there's a lot of like back and forth that I was reading here, back and forth between them and the northern kingdom. So you had Judea and Samaria, and the contest for control between those ended up creating that Jewish and Samaritan interaction there. So it was really interesting that ended up actually became a political thing. I'm trying to read here because I read this whole thing. So even the priest Ezra thought there could be reconciliation between the two societies, but then the governor of the southern kingdoms took a racist approach, which is pretty interesting, and saying that their blood was impure, they simply were not us, and the verbal disputes led to insults, and insults led to violence, and it created a separation again there, even though Ezra tried to bring them back together. Am I moving around? I'm sorry. So that's kind of the history there, where there was some very heavy animosity between the Jews and the Samaritans. What's that? Enmity. That's, I think, the word I was looking for. Enmity. This was a long time. So this was from, I don't know exactly when the kingdom split. So it would have been 500 to 700 years of this conflict, because the split happened around 800 or 700 BC, somewhere in that range. So that was going on. It's been going on for 700 years, roughly. That these two cultures were set against each other over the place of worship, and over a very muddy history. Because there's actually some people believe that even some of the people that were considered Samaritans were actually, whenever the southern kingdom was taken over by Babylon and they were all exiled, some of the people that stuck around ended up moving up into the Samaritan area. And there's a lot of they're not 100% sure what all went down there, and there could be some Jewish. I mean, they're the same. They're from the same group. It's just they got labeled as something different. So it'd be like Americans getting lost in Alaska for 300 years, and all of a sudden we're like, well, they're not really Americans. They're Alaskans, because they believe different things, and they live by a different code up there. So they're not really the same, even though they are from the same root. That's kind of how the Jews and the Samaritans got separated there. So that leads into the story, obviously, of the Samaritan woman, which I'm going to read it because I really like this story a lot. I think it's a really good picture of how Jesus interacted with someone that was, to the Jewish culture, unclean, or not somebody who was supposed to be talked to or interacted with. So this is in John 4, starting in verse 5. So Jesus arrived at the Samaritan village of Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Wearied by his long journey, he sat on the edge of Jacob's well and sent his disciples into the village to buy food, for it was already afternoon. Soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." She replied, "Why would a Jewish man ask a Samaritan woman for a drink of water? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." Jesus replied, "If you only knew who I am and the gift that God wants to give you, you'd ask me for a drink, and I would give you living water." The woman replied, "But sir, you don't even have a bucket, and the well is very deep. So where do you find this living water? Do you really think that you are greater than our ancestor Jacob, who dug this well and drank from it himself, along with his children and livestock?" Jesus answered, "If you drink from Jacob's well, you will be thirsty again. But if anyone drinks the living water I give them, they will never be thirsty again. For when you drink the water I give you, it becomes a gushing fountain of the Holy Spirit, flooding you with endless life." The woman replied, "Let me drink that water so I'll never be thirsty again and won't have to come back here to draw water." Jesus said, "Go get your husband and bring him back here." "But I'm not married," the woman answered. "That's true," Jesus said, "for you have been married 5 times, and now you're living with a man who is not your husband. You have told the truth." The woman changed the subject. "You must be a prophet. So tell me this, why do our fathers worship God on this nearby mountain? But your people teach that Jerusalem is the place where we must worship. Who is right?" Jesus responded, "Believe me, dear woman, the time has come when you will worship the Father neither on a mountain nor in Jerusalem, but in your heart. Your people don't really know the one they worship, but we Jews worship out of our experience. For it's from the Jews that salvation is available. From now on, worshiping the Father will not be a matter of the right place, but with a right heart. For God is a spirit, and he longs to have sincere worshipers who adore him in the realm of spirit and in truth." The woman said, "All this is so confusing, but I do know that the Anointed One is coming, the true Messiah. And when he comes, he will tell us everything we need to know." Jesus said to her, "You don't have to wait any longer. The Anointed One is here speaking with you. I am the one you're looking for." At that moment, his disciples returned and were stunned to see Jesus speaking with the Samaritan woman, yet none of them dared to ask him why or what they were discussing. All at once, the woman left her water jar and ran off to her village and told everyone, "Come and meet the man at the well who told me everything I've ever done. He could be the one we've been waiting for." Hearing this, the Jews came streaming out of the village to see Jesus. So, if you keep reading down on this whole chapter, it's actually a pretty powerful story. That woman ends up converting or helping to convert pretty much the whole village and to believe in who Jesus was and what he had come to do. And I did, again, a little bit of research. I think Mark's talked a little bit about this as well, but the Samaritan woman actually does have a name, and she has a little bit of a history, and it's actually a really amazing history. So I want to talk about that a little bit, but some things that I wanted to talk about specifically from this story. So while this all happened in one conversation, I feel like this was kind of Jesus showing a picture of how to interact with someone who maybe you don't agree with or doesn't live in your circles. So I kind of broke it down into each section of the conversation as to how maybe we can have these type of conversations and have these interactions with people that we don't necessarily agree with on things or have different beliefs on. So the first part was what I would call an unattached interaction. So he really wasn't going deep with her right off the bat. He was just making connection. He was he needed water. He saw someone who needed water, and so he asked for water. So the way I looked at that was, it's a good way of how we can interact with the world or interact with those that we don't agree with. We meet them where they're at. We're not coming in guns blazing. I can't believe this is how you think, and it's more of, hey, what's going on, or just a general conversation to create that connection and to create relationships. So that's what he did first. There was to create a relationship, create a connection with the Samaritan woman. So, it's not spiritual to call, or he. What I'm trying to say here. It's calling up a request. So it wasn't spiritual, or it wasn't him calling out anything negative in her. It was just calling her up and requesting something that she can bring to benefit Jesus, which I think was really cool. I mean, he was saying, "Hey, I need water, and you can get me water. Could you get me some water?" It was empowering for her, and was also disarming in, "Hey, I'm having this initial interaction with you," which I think is really cool. So that type of interaction, in my experience, will eventually bring inquiry and questions. So obviously the next thing that the Samaritan woman did was she was like, "Why are you talking to me? Like, what's going on here? There's something weird. You just asked me for water and you're a Jew. How is that possible?" And in our regular life, that could be somebody being like, "Hey, why are you hanging out with me? Like, I know you go to church. I know you do all this stuff. Why are you spending time with me? Why are you investing in my life? Like, what's going on here?" So that genuine interaction, that genuine connection creates that opportunity for questions to be asked. So then that genuine interaction, whenever they start asking those questions, I feel like that creates an opportunity for deep connections. So that's where Jesus brought in, hey, like, here's an opportunity. I'm gonna lean into this a little bit and really go after this Samaritan woman. I talked about the Jew and Samaritan relationship history. There really wasn't that much difference, except for 700 years of them arguing over where they want to worship, and a lot of interaction between political things. But it it's interesting to see that both claim Abraham as their father, both follow the Pentateuch, both believe in the coming Messiah. As you read here, she believes that there is a Messiah that's coming. She has very similar beliefs to what a Jew has. So there wasn't as much disagreement and as much contention as maybe we're led to believe between Jews and Samaritans. So once that genuine connection is made, Jesus can then open up dialogue that speaks to the core of the Samaritan woman. He speaks and talks about things that create a desire in her to experience. So he starts talking about living water. Starts talking about being able to experience that living water. If you had asked me for it, I could give it to you and you'd never thirst again. And, because that connection had been made there, there was an openness and a door there that was open for her to experience that, which I thought was really cool. So then the cool thing about that, I love Jesus' interaction here because she tries to pivot the conversation. She's like, this is getting uncomfortable. I don't like what we're talking about here. So, hey, why are you, where does she say this? She tried to change the subject. You must be a prophet, because he had gone through and he had really impacted her by saying, hey, you don't have a husband. You've had 5 husbands. She's like, what's going on here? So she tries to change the subject and saying, hey, which place should we worship? So now she's going a totally different direction than where Jesus was wanting to go. Hey, do we worship on the mountain? Do we worship in Jerusalem? What's going on here? And he pivots the conversation and brings it back to himself and what living the life he is offering brings and how it bridges chasms instead of creating them. So he brings it back to, it doesn't really matter where you worship. We're going to worship in our heart. We're going to, whenever I come or whenever the Messiah comes, there's not going to be a place that you have to go to worship. You're going to be able to experience that in your everyday life, which I thought was a really cool way of him saying it's not important. The political information or the political decision of which is the best place to worship isn't really important. It's about me, and it's about interaction with me and relationship with me. I thought that was really, really cool. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like that. I mean, that is kind of something that I really think is important. Is that he, instead of staying in his camp, he went to find common ground, and that's kind of like something that I feel like is super important in our relationships. Is instead of saying, "No, I'm right, you're wrong," it's going higher and finding that common ground. It's finding that bridge, and where we can meet together and be like, "Man, I can get on board with that." Hmm. Yeah. Wow. We need to change. I like that a lot. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. It's not gonna matter. Yeah, Ben. Mm. Mm. Right. to my understanding, I mean, again, I didn't go like exhaustive research, but my understanding was they did not have access to the Jerusalem and the temple, so they had to create their own place. And yeah, well, the journey, it's 35 miles. Like that's the distance between where the Jerusalem and where Samaria was. Like I guess that's true. Yeah, that is true. I mean, yeah. I think about them like 35 miles. It's like Washington to Baltimore, maybe. But like, yeah, it was a distance, to walk. But like the way that they did it is why I think some of the perspective shifted. So they actually built golden calves for the locations where they worshipped. And the southern kingdom was like, wow, you're worshiping idols. And that wasn't, from what I understand with the research that I've done, that really wasn't the purpose of it. Was just like, hey, here's a place to worship God. And it happened to be golden calves. And I guess there's bad history there with golden calves. So the southern kingdom automatically said, you guys are worshiping idols. Right. Yes. Right. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm. Right. Mm. Yeah. Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Redeems that I thought of, like he redeemed that interaction. Mm. Right. I think even you've talked about it before, where like he did something intentionally to have, to to show them, hey, this doesn't work, and that could have been another situation where it was like, hey, we're going to do this thing, and you're going to see this doesn't work, so that I can come back around and be like, hey, yeah, this doesn't work. We're going to do something different, and it's going to be better, and it's going to include everybody. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So that's actually so beautiful because that's really like I think that's where I was trying to get to, or in my brain what I was trying to articulate in the whenever you come with that type of perspective of it's not that I'm right and you're wrong. It's not that I'm wrong and you're right. It's what can we find and what can we do together. And I think that's the beauty of relationship is finding that elevated ground in the things that we feel like, well, I'm a way over here and you're way over there, and there's no way we can find any middle ground. Right. Yeah. Yeah. could have gone in the water. That's true. Yeah, and what I love about that story is that, and like I was saying before, that engagement and that ability to find that elevated ground. I mean, what this Samaritan woman then turned around and did for the kingdom and for the early church is like, I'm going to read a little bit about what she did. So her name was, I'm going to probably butcher this, I think it's Fatini, something like that. And she was actually, so I'm not sure if that was her name or if when she was baptized, that's the name that she received. There's a little bit of like ambiguity there. They're not 100% sure, but it means luminous one or enlightened one. So after she was baptized, she shared the gospel with her 5 sisters and her 2 sons who also received it. So her ministry, her real, so obviously she did a lot there in that town, but then whenever she found out about Paul's martyrdom, she and her family moved down and became pretty powerful apostles for Christianity and for the church. And there's all kinds of stories about her, and specifically with the Emperor Nero. She was imprisoned by Nero. Nero tried to get the women to give up their faith by putting them with a bunch of his daughters and a bunch of situations where there was a lot of gold and riches and things hey, here's some cool things to look at. And Fotini ended up converting all of the daughters, and it is a really cool story. It was the opposite effect of what Nero tried to poison her. I mean, there's all kinds of stories of how the Lord was super powerful through her. She did eventually die for her faith, but she brought such a powerful impact to the early church just from this interaction and her interaction with Jesus, and Jesus willing to find that elevated ground. It changed the early church, in my opinion, in how impactful it was in her willingness to do that. So I just think that's a really cool story of how when we find that elevated place and that common ground, what can be done and what can be accomplished. It's really cool. So, and I just love that. Elevated ground or that common, finding that place is just a really cool way to look at that, because it's what that story is about. It's about, hey, maybe we're both wrong. Maybe there's a better place that we can find. And I've never really thought about it that way, honestly. I was thinking about more how can we interact with people that we know are wrong, or we could still have relationship with them. But man, that's just feels so much better to say, how can we find that better place? Where there's a little bit of what you believe and there's a little bit of what I believe, and it's a much better place and a much realer place of where we're going. So, yeah, that's really good. Yeah. Oh.
I was talking to Kendall last week, and Kendall said something I loved. He was saying something, he was trying to figure out one way or the other, and he said, no, I'm thinking dualistically again. Let's pull ourselves up and look at it from above. And I love that, because that, to me, that's what we're doing here, right? We're not tug-of-warring left or right. We're pulling up to the Father's perspective, where the higher principle encompasses all, right?
Man, I just want to sit in that for a minute. It's really good. So I want to read Romans 14 as I was doing some research and just trying to find the scriptures and how it talks about diversity or division and how to live together in harmony. Romans 14 kept coming up. The title of it is Unity in the Midst of Diversity, so I think it's probably a pretty good one to read. So Romans 14, starting in chapter 1. Offer an open hand of fellowship to welcome every true believer, even though their faith may be weak and immature, and refuse to engage in debates with them concerning nothing more than opinions. For example, one believer has no problem with eating all kinds of food, but another with weaker faith will only eat vegetables. The one who eats freely shouldn't judge and look down on the one who eats only vegetables, and the vegetarian must not judge and look down on the one who eats everything. Remember, God has welcomed him and taken him as his partner. Who do you think you are to sit in judgment of someone else's household servant? His own master is the one to to evaluate whether he succeeds or fails. And God's servants will succeed, for God's power supports them and enables them to stand. In the same way, one person regards a certain day as more sacred than another, and another person regards them all alike. There is nothing wrong with having different personal convictions about such matters. For the person who observes one day as especially sacred does it to honor the Lord. And the same is true regarding what a person eats. The one who eats everything eats to honor the Lord, because he gives thanks to God, and the one who has a special diet does it to honor the Lord, and he also gives thanks to God. So, Mark, you're good, and Amanda's good too. Yeah. 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 Right. 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 That's right. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean that if you as you read down here in Romans, it actually talks specifically about that. Stop being critical and condemning of other believers, but instead determined to never deliberately cause a brother or sister to stumble and fall because of your actions. I mean, so that's exactly what it's saying. It's like, hey, if it's good for you, like I mean, and that's fine, and you have to work out your faith in that way, but don't do something that then causes somebody else to stumble. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Right. It's a relationship. Yeah. So that's Roman, and it keeps going on, and it talks a lot about what you just said. Like, make it a priority to live a life of peace with harmony in your relationships, eagerly seeking to strengthen and encourage one another. Stop ruining the work of God by insisting on your own opinions about food. How about stop ruining the work of God by insisting on your own opinions about ... politics. I don't know. You could put anything in there. It doesn't have to be specific. It's talking about food here, but this is obviously an example. It's not hey, it's just about food. Everything else you guys can fight about. It's cool. Like it's obviously this is talking about a general. Hey, here's an example, but this does not just apply to food. This applies to your life. This applies to relationships. So you can eat anything I love this. You can eat anything you want, but it is wrong to deliberately cause someone to be offended over what you eat. Consider it an act of love to refrain from eating meat or drinking wine or doing anything else that would cause a fellow believer to be offended or tempted and be weakened in his faith. So yeah, I mean, that's exactly what you were saying. It's pretty cool. Next verse. Keep the convictions you have about these matters between yourself and God, and don't impose them upon others. You'll be happy when you don't judge yourself in doing what your conscience approves. But the one who has misgivings feels miserable if he eats meat because he doubts and doesn't eat in faith. For anything we do that doesn't spring from faith is by definition sinful. So this is a really cool, I love the concept of that verse and living by your own convictions, but also honoring those that you're in relationship with and their convictions. There was another verse. So Paul had a lot of really good things to say about division and conflict, and I love it. So in 1 Corinthians 9:19 through 23, he talks, and this is the conversation where he has about when I'm with the Jews, I'm a Jew. When I'm with Gentile, again, it's a similar concept. Even though I am free from obligations to others, I joyfully make myself a servant to all in order to win as many converts as possible. I become Jewish to the Jewish people in order to win them to the Messiah. I become like one under the law to gain the people who were stuck under the law, even though I myself am not under the law. And to those who are without the Jewish laws, I become like them, as one without the Jewish laws, in order to win them, although I am not outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ. I became weak to the weak to win the weak. I have adapted to the culture of every place I've gone so that I could more easily win people to Christ. I've done all this so that I would become God's partner for the sake of the gospel. So I think about that. I read that and I think, how does that look? Like, what does that look like? Like when you're interacting with somebody, how does that, I don't have the answers. This is actually a question that I have. How do you reconcile that with be in the world but not of it? Like, what does that look like? How do you become weak to the weak to win the weak? I mean, what does that look like? I'm genuinely, I don't know. I think it's a very interesting thing to think about. He's adapted to the culture of every place he's gone so that I could more easily win people to Christ. And what does that mean? Like, what did that look like for Paul? What does that look like for us? What does adapting to the culture mean? Any ideas? Melanie knows? What does adapting to the culture look like? It's something to think about. Like I've read those verses before, but I've never really considered that in like my everyday life. As how do I adapt to the culture wherever I am while maintaining my integrity as a Christian, as a man of God? Like, what does that look like? I don't know. Another one that, again, Paul talks about, it's in 1 Corinthians 1:10 through 13, and this is more specifically towards, I would say, interactions among the church. I urge you, my brothers and sisters, for the sake of the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, to agree to live in unity with one another, and to put to rest any division that attempts to tear you apart. Be restored as one united body, living in perfect harmony. Form a consistent choreography among yourselves, having a common perspective with shared values. My dear brothers and sisters, I have a serious concern I need to bring up with you, for I have been informed by those of Chloe's house church that you have been destructively arguing amongst yourselves. And I need to bring this up because each of you is claiming loyalty to different preachers. Some are saying, I am a disciple of Paul, or I follow Apollos, or I am a disciple of Peter the Rock. And some, I belong only to Christ. But let me ask you, is Christ divided up into groups? Did I die on the cross for you? At your baptism, did you pledge yourselves to follow Paul? And he goes on to talk about he's thankful that he didn't baptize anybody. He only baptized like 2 people because it could have caused division there. But for me, that was like I immediately thought of denominations. You know, that's the first thing I thought of. Is I am, you know, in a Christian culture, you know, some people are defined by, you know, I'm a Mennonite, or I'm non-denominational. I'm an Assembly of God. I'm a Pentecostal. I'm Amish. You know, you go the whole gambit. You know. So, and I even put in here, who cares? I mean, that sounds crazy, but like, does it really? How important is that? Like, why have we put our identity as Christians in denominational beliefs. And I think there's been times, and I feel like we've done it sometimes, where we have come together despite denominations to just celebrate Christ. And it happens, but it doesn't seem to happen enough. And I don't know how we bridge that gap, because there are some pretty aggressive differences in how we believe to some people. To some people, not so much. To other people, it's way more important, I believe you sprinkle, and I believe you dunk, and that can be a huge deal to some people. And how do you bridge that gap? I don't know. Right. Yeah. Are drums evil? Are they not evil? You laugh, but that's actually how some people believe. I know Diane grew up in a church that was a real big struggle to bring drums into the church. Like, it was some of the older generation did not like that. Tambourines. So, I think, again, this is a situation is like, how do you come into that? How do you find, where can we agree? Where can we find that common ground? Where can we find that elevated ground with each other and just worship Jesus? Just be there for Jesus and who he is. So, yeah. Yeah, I feel like maybe he's just more focused on the fact that there's division there. That one is a little weird, at the end there. Yeah. I belong only to Christ. Yeah. I wonder if it's more like, hey, I'm not going to interact with you people because I belong only to Christ. I'm not gonna. I'm on my own, and that's okay because I belong to Christ. Maybe that's the mentality that he was talking about. I don't know. Because that happens. Oh, I don't go to church because it's just me and Jesus. Which, if that works for you, that's great. But I think relationship and family and people around you is really, really important. And I think we miss something whenever we live in that type of mentality. So something I put here, and I'm not sure how I feel about this, was just as I was thinking through, I think sometimes disagreement in doctrine can become educational and enlightening when you can find common footing and are not shouting across the rift. So when you're yelling across a chasm, it's really easy to be like, no, you're wrong, and I believe because I believe this, and no, you're wrong because I believe this. But if you're able to find that common Jesus ground, it's amazing that you can have an interaction, be like, wow, I never thought about it that way. Or that's an interesting perspective. I'll have to consider that. But at the end of the day, if we can all agree, Jesus and him crucified, I feel like those kind of conversations can be enlightening and educational and uplifting versus divisive and angry and bad. So. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm. Crazy. Right. Yeah, truth is truth. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The echo chamber. And the best example I have of the echo chamber, or the chamber, or the group of people who all agree with each other, is whenever the Yugo was created. Everybody thought it was awesome until they released it to the public, and then they were like, "Oh, right, we probably should have some people in here that had a different perspective than we did," because it did not go well. Maybe. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's true. Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Yeah. So, I think about like Mark, your analogy and thing you used before about sitting in someone's cave, and I feel like that's a pretty critical part about how relationship can happen and how someone who you don't understand how they think, if you take a minute and you sit in their experience, sit in what's going on inside of them, it will quickly change your perspective. No question. It may not change how you believe or what you think, but it will change your perspective on how you look at that person, I think. Maybe it will change what you believe. I don't know. But I'm sure there's situations where it absolutely will change what you believe. But I think there's also situations where it will soften you towards someone, that you'll be able to interact with them in a way that maybe if you hadn't taken that minute to sit in their experience, you would have never been able to reach them at that level, because you're screaming at them across the chasm again. You're wrong. This is evil. How dare you do this thing? Versus, wow, I never really thought about. Like, so for me, like the one thing that, and it's such a touchy subject, but like abortion, like, yes, I believe abortion is wrong, but I also can understand, or I can't understand, but if I take a minute and sit in a situation of a girl who has no other choice, or feels like she has no other choice and she has no other options, and no one is with her in that experience, and she's by herself and she's alone, and what's she going to do? No one's offered to help. No one's offered. The person who got her pregnant is long gone. Her parents don't want to talk to her. Like, what do you do? Like, that changes, like, do I still think it's okay for them to abort? No, but I also understand, wow, I can't imagine being in that situation. I can't imagine having to make that choice. So it softens my heart and softens my perspective versus, you're evil, you're a murderer, you're all these things that we shout across the way to these people. Yeah. I think that's really important. I think we have, over the last probably 4 or 5 years, allowed political beliefs to really cause us to separate and to jump into, I'm over here, and I can't possibly have interaction or relationship with someone of the opposite political party because they're wrong, and either they're crazy, or they're evil, or they're all these things, where I think if we take a minute, we pause, we lay down our hackles, we lay down our pitchforks, we lay down our things, and we go over and say, hey, why do you, like, let's talk about this thing that you are so passionate about. Oh, I never thought about it that way. Oh, wow, I don't necessarily agree that this particular situation should be done by this group, but I understand why you want that to happen, and I agree that I think that should happen. Like, it's amazing. I think we would be shocked how similar our beliefs are, and just the way that we want to get it done is different. I actually really believe that. That has shifted my perspective significantly. And yeah, maybe I don't agree with how they want to get it done, but what they want done, I absolutely want done. So, last one I want to read is in Ephesians, and it kind of goes into this about versus being divisive with people. Versus understanding that it's something else beyond that, is in chapter 6, verse 10. Now, my beloved ones, I have saved these most important truths for last. Be supernaturally infused with strength through your life union with the Lord Jesus. Stand victorious with the force of his explosive power flowing in and through you. That's just a really good verse. Put on God's complete set of armor provided for us so that you will be protected as you fight against the evil strategies of the accuser. Your hand-to-hand combat is not with human beings. Again, your hand-to-hand combat is not with human beings, but with the highest principalities and authorities operating in rebellion under the heavenly realms. For they are a powerful class of demon gods and evil spirits that hold this dark world in bondage. Because of this, you must wear all the armor that God provides, so you're protected as you confront the slanderer, for you are destined for all things and will rise victorious. So, like, just from those verses, stop. My perspective on that is stop fighting people. Like, stop it. We are not the enemy. The enemy hides behind division and disagreement. They delight in separation. They want to create those chasms. They want to create those separations. It's their goal. Because the more you're separated, the less likely you are to come and find common ground, because there's such a distance between you. You're not willing to make, it's not like you're going to jump in a car and drive 35 miles. It's like it's 35 miles walking. And you're like, yeah, I can't do that. So stop it. Yeah. Jesus is that place. That's what I said there. So that's where we find that common ground. So that's all I got. Any other thoughts? Comments? Suggestions? Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah. That word cognitive dissonance. I like that. Mm-hmm. No.
they love that. that it's not how love brutal. Know what you think. So aggressive, so arrogant, so much that will dishonor the people. God forbid, a whole different life. It's, not they have a reason for that. Write them off. I was thinking about that pandemic happened, and I'm so eager to say, for a while, that word was so mad. And then one day the Lord looked at something I never felt safe. That space we still have. Just like beyond that, they still are crying. Yeah, I just get safe. Can't think. It's safe. And once the Lord showed me that, I was like so repentant for all of this. So worried about being. They've never been. Long. Christ that was life. Ah.
Let's pray. Lord, thank you for your example of what it looks like to interact with the world, with our brothers and sisters. I just ask that you continue to reveal to us your heart. Reveal to us the elevated place. And help us to continue to open our hearts to those that maybe don't think like we do, but still have something to offer, perspective to give, knowledge to teach. And help us to continue to elevate each other and to avoid causing people to stumble as we continue to walk towards you and bringing you to the earth, Lord.